Mo. I'm just getting some things together right quick, sending out a couple of messages. If you can hear me, can somebody send a message, excuse me, in the chat? Just let me know you can hear me clearly, and in a second we'll get moving. And if you have some questions, you can start typing them in the chat right now. You have to log in order to ask questions. If you don't have an account, you can sign up for an account real quick. It's just like signing up for a free email account. It takes a few minutes. And then once you sign up for the account and log in, then you can participate in the chat, and you can also submit the questions. But somebody just send me a message in the chat now and just let me know if you can hear me. So you can see clearly, you can hear clearly, and we're going to get moving in a couple of seconds. All right, I'm going to send out another message, and then we're going to get going. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, made out. So you can hear me good? Cool. All right, just making sure this message went out. Just want to clarify that. Okay, just give me another couple of minutes. I have to log into the Facebook right quick so the message can get through, and we'll get started. Okay, for those who are just joining us, you can type in your questions. If you have questions already, you can type in the questions in the chat, and we will start answering in a couple of minutes. Just wanted to update the Facebook group so people know. All right, I think it's okay. It looks like it posted. Okay. So mi chiamo Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Ptah Akhan Eneye Akwesida. That means greetings. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi Ptah Akhan. I'm Odwirafo of Akwamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, which is the Akwamu Nation in North America. What we're doing today is we're having our second NKOMMO, which is a question and answer session conversation. The last time we had a question and answer session, it was the day after the winter solstice on the 22nd, and we said that we were going to have another one just to, a number of people have a number of questions. We have a number of publications out. We have published some additional materials since that last question and answer session. So a number of people have had questions. They've been asking for us to come back and, shed light on specific articles, specific videos, specific ritual practices, things that we publish on, things that we talk about. Just to give an update, we are tentatively, we're going to be in Houston, Texas in April. We're going to have a presentation in Washington, D.C. We are planning for March 22nd, but we will be updating you. So check the website on a regular basis to get those updates in the Guamu Casa section, as well as on the front page of the Odwirafo.com website. So that's what's coming up soon. Most likely in the next 2 weeks, we'll have our next presentation. Also, Apo, which is a Akan Ancestral Observance of Purification. It will be from the 13th through the 25th, March 13th, March 25th. Let me give you a link to that on the website just so you have an idea of some of the things that we engage in. Okay, so Apo Afashe is a purificatory observance where we, halfway through the year, the beginning of our year is the first full day of the autumn or Atemet equinox. This year, September 22nd, that was the beginning of our year of 13,014. Of course, we don't use the dates of the fictional character Jesus to base our time on. We use actual dates. We're in the midst of the Afe Kesie 26,000 year cycle, hence the year's beginning with 13,000. We're in 13,014. In the Akhan tradition and many other traditions, the end of the hot cycle of the year that brings to a close is the autumn equinox, where things even out, and then we go into a period of the quote-unquote underworld for basically, for example, if you look at the sun rising in the east, reaching noon at its peak, and then setting in the west, that's very similar to spring, March 21st. Noon is like the summer solstice on June 21st, June 20th, and then the evening period is like the equinox, the evening period, September 22nd, September 23rd, and then you go down to midnight or winter, the winter solstice, the lowest point of the sun, the darkest day of the year, and so forth. That's December 20th, December 21st, and then sunlight begins to increase about a minute to 2 minutes per day every day leading up to March 21st, and then you get back to the equinox. When the sun sets in the evening and hits the evening period, and then the sun goes below the horizon, that's the end of the light part of the day. That's also the beginning of a new cycle. The sun setting in the west in a comet called the Ament, or the Amenti, the western land. When the sun sets in the west and penetrates and goes into the quote-unquote underworld, that's akin to a seed being planted in the ground. It's the end of one cycle, but it's also the beginning of another cycle. It's a seeding period. Then the roots go down deep into the soil. That's like the sun going down towards the darkest part of the year, December 21st. But then the shoots begin to rise up from the soil and break through the earth. That's around sunrise or March 21st. And that's the halfway point of our year. So we have Obra Jira, our New Year celebration, September 22nd, when the sun is setting, when the sun in its equinoctial point is going to penetrating and going to the quote-unquote lower, cooler part of the year. That's the seeding period, the conception period, later the germination period, and eventually 6 months later, it is the sprouting period. So we have Apo, which means rejection. It's a purification, purificatory ancestral observance. So we talk about that on the Apo page. We just sent the link up there. So that's coming up March 13th through the 25th is a 13-day observance, just like Apo is a 7-day observance every year. And the last day of our observance in Okra, where our New Year celebration, NKOMMO, is the first day of the autumn equinox. So that's coming up ritually. As far as presentations, again, we'll be doing something in DC, hopefully on March 22nd, or if not that weekend, the following weekend, but we will be doing, our next presentation will be in the DC, Maryland area, but it will be in DC. And then we have a date for tentative April 19th, the weekend of April 19th in Houston. We'll be back in Houston. We were in Houston back in October. We'll be back in April, so we'll be giving you the details on that coming up. It's most likely going to be a 2-day event. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, start typing the questions in, and I just want to show you what we published recently. Okay, so we have our NHOMA page, and let me give you the direct link to the page. Okay, so that's the NHOMA page. NHOMA means publications. So what we have done, as many of you know, we have 12 books. We have about 60 research articles. We have 45 videos. Most of them are about 2 hours each, educational, instructional videos dealing with going through all the various publications, or many of the publications that we have. We go basically point by point to go into detail to address the various concepts and cosmological information and true historical information in the publications in those videos. So the 12 books, the 60+ research articles, 45 videos. We also have about 9.5 hours of audio. All that information is on Odwirafo.com. All the PDF versions, ebook versions of all of the books, all of the articles are all free downloads. All the videos, it's about 54 hours worth of videos. All of that is free downloads as well. All of those are free downloads as well. And then the audio, about 9.5 hours of audio. That includes the Kuku Tuntun, the ancestral jurisdiction, as well as the Makeru. All of those free downloads as well. What we have done in addition recently, since about a week and a half ago, we created the NHOMA page, and now we have some of our publications in softcover in addition to the ebook version. So you can download the ebook versions, but now we have 5 of the publications in softcover that you can order, and we will be adding more on a regular basis. Coming up this week, we'll have about 2 more publications available in softcover in addition to the ebook versions. And so you just keep checking the NHOMA page, because there are a number of publications that people have asked for in the softcover that they've been looking for. So we're publishing those now. So far, we already had the Oberima Afurakani manhood book, softcover version, right? 7 principal values of Afurakani manhood based on the 7 days of the week, and the Abosom, the divinities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. So we go into detail about that. So every single day of the week, the energy that governs that day, there's a principal value of Afurakani manhood that governs that day and is energized by that principle and can be operationalized by the male individual, the Afurakani male. So every day is an opportunity to attune to not just the energy of the day, but the principal value that's associated with that energy to manifest that principal value in life. So we always have something to focus on perpetually. So that we have that book. And we also have a 2-part video series where we go through the book. The ebook version of that book is free. The softcover version, you can order that directly from the publications page. We also have the Okraa complex, the soul of AKANFO. We talk about the nature and function of the soul, the Kait in Kemet, the Ori in Yoruba, the Selido in Vodun, the Okraa, male and female terms for soul in Akhan. We're going into detail about that. We're going to get into some of that tonight because somebody had a question about that. So we have that as well. We also have the Uben Sheng, the ancestral summons. We talk about the nature and function of our ritual practices, their validity, their necessity, the fact that what we engage in is not symbolic, but it's functional. Every ritual practice we engage in, whether it's dealing with ancestral shrines, ritual song, ritual prayer, ritual dance, idols, whatever we deal with is functional. We're receiving, processing, and transferring energy in a measurable, productive fashion. If we're not receiving, processing, and transferring energy, then we're not engaged in any real ritual practice and we don't deal with it. If it is functional, we utilize it. If it is not, if it's just purely symbolic, we have nothing to do with it. So we talk about that in the Uben Sheng. Now, just recently, we just released the softcover version, an expanded softcover version of the Kuku Tuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction. Now, we first published that publication in 13,002, which is Gregorian 2002, as a 3 CD set. Then we released the MP3s on the website. It's free download, the entire 3 CD set in the form of MP3 files, audio files on the website. You can still download those, but then we published the entire transcript in book form so you can read the entire book. We also have images from the Medutu, from the hieroglyphs, images about the deities that we talk about in the text. In the text, we talk about the origin of creation, the cosmological foundation of creation, the nature of our identity as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people and what that means, the nature of the whites and their offspring, spirits of disorder, the enemies of us, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. We also talk about the origin of the fictional characters of the Bible, Quran, and Talmud. Jesus, Yeshua ben Pandera, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, David, Muhammad, Buddha, Brahman. All of these characters and more are absolutely fictional. They never existed of any race whatsoever, not black, not white, none of that. So we go into detail to show how those characters were manufactured by the whites and their offspring once they invaded ancient Kemet, how they made these characters up, how they used descriptive titles of deities from Kemet. Sometimes they just corrupted the titles, sometimes they used the exact same titles, where they got information about the functions of deities in nature from Kemet and applied these to fictional white characters and forced these characters on us as though they were real, living characters. Some Negroes have tried to blacken these white fictional characters up to make themselves feel good, to believe that Jesus was black or Muhammad was black and so forth. We go into detail to show that these characters never existed. So we now have that text in soft cover as well as the PDF version. And we also just released an expanded version of our book, Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit, The Origin of the Term Africa, parts 1 through 4. Soft cover, of course, is also an ebook as well. We go into detail to show that the term Africa comes from Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit. Ka means land, the high land, the first land created by the creator and creatress. Ra is the title of the creator, Raed is the title of the creatress. Afura is a title of Ra, Afuraed is the title of Raed. So the Ka of Afura is Afuraka, the land of the creator. Kait of Afuraet is Afuraitkaitnit, the land of the creatress. So we show cosmologically, we show in the Medutu, in the hieroglyphics of ancient Kemet, the term Afurakai in the papyrus of Hunefer, as well as the papyrus of Ani, the Runu Pert Imheru, so-called misnomer, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, but it's the Runu Pert Imheru, the specific Ani Sheftu, of the Ani papyrus, as well as the Hunefer papyrus, the Shefti Hunefer papyrus, and then also from the Temple of All Set in Paraka, or what they call Philae, the Philae Temple of All Set, we show the term in there as well in the Medutu. Now, we are the first to ever publish the actual origin of the term Africa and prove that it existed. It's an indigenous name. It comes directly from our people, and it's directly tied to our cosmology. It directly references the first landmass that rose up at the beginning of creation when the entire earth was covered by water. Ra and Ra'et caused the first landmass to rise up above the surface of the water. That high land was called Ka. And when Ra moves through that land, he takes on the title Afura, meaning Ra moving through the flesh. Afura moving through the Ka is Afura moving through the first landmass. It's the land Ka of Afura, Afura Ka. And we are the first to publish that. There are many European authors, so-called scholars, as well as some Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African black scholars who have weighed in on this issue. They couldn't find the actual origin of the term, so they assumed that, and the white authors, of course, would give misinformation, saying that the term comes from the Greek, meaning Afrik, meaning not cold, or coming from Apreka, meaning the sunny land, or Ifriqiya in Arabic, talking about the Queen of Heaven, or Afar, or a number of different Sanskrit, Apara, meaning the land that comes after, or Afar, a number of different terms. We show each one of these terms in Greek, in Latin, in Sanskrit, in Arabic, all of the various terms that you can find in the publication released by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, when they did basically a breakdown of what the different meanings they believe come from the term Africa, or how Africa was derived. They give about 7 different definitions, possibilities, whether it's Greek, Roman, Latin, Sanskrit, and so forth, Phoenician, and different possibilities. We show that each one of those terms, number one, are not the origin of the term. Number two, we show the actual origin of the Greek term, the actual origin of the Roman term, the Latin term, the actual origin of the Sanskrit term, the actual origin of the Arabic term, all the various terms, the term Afrikas, meaning the southwest, south wind, all the terms that they use, we show that actually all of them can be found in the Medutu with the same meanings, but they are not the origin of the term Africa. Then we show in the actual Medutu, which nobody else has shown in the past, we were the first to publish that anywhere, black or white, the actual Medutu showing the actual term. There are a lot of Negroes out here, whether they're Moors, Hebrews, Muslims, Christians, whoever, who are continuously promoting the misinformation that Africa comes from Leo Africanus, Africa comes from Scipio Africanus. We address that entire, we go into detail about that. Scipio Africanus, his last name was not Africanus. His father's last name was not Africanus. His grandfather, great-grandfather. So we show the lineage of him and his brother, whose last name was Scipio. His father's last name was Scipio. His grandfather's last name was Scipio. And his great-grandfather's last name was Scipio Barbatus. It wasn't until Publius Cornelius Scipio invaded Afuraikai, Africa, and took over a portion of the northern part of the continent, winning that battle, that he took on the name after that, Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus. Prior to that, his last name was Scipio. His brother, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, Scipio was his last name, but then when he invaded Asia and he won a battle in Asia, he took on the last name Asiaticus. So one brother became Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus after invading Afuraikai. The other brother became known as Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus after invading Asia. Now, those who want to identify foolishly with Asia and say that black people are Asiatic and nonsense like that, they won't tell you about Lucius Cornelius Scipio, who invaded Asia and took on the name Scipio Asiaticus. They won't say that he named the whole continent Asia after himself. They'll say that he took on the name Asiaticus because he invaded and won a war in Asia. But at the same time, they'll say Publius Cornelius Scipio, when he invaded Afuraitkaitnit and won a war in the northern part, then he named the continent after himself. That's foolishness. We have misguided individuals who teach that foolishness, so-called scholars, so-called elders who are perpetuating that nonsense. And then you have people, of course, who are deliberately lying when they know the truth because they've studied some of our work and seen in the Medutu where the term actually comes from. So that publication is free, a free PDF, but then now we have the softcover version, and it's expanded. We added a new appendix and we added some more information throughout the body of the text, and we just did that a week and a half ago. So this is brand new, and we show, for example, some of the new information comes from the papyrus of Hunefer. We already had the information from the papyrus of Ani, as well as the Temple of Aset in Paraka or Philae, showing Afuraitkaitnit in the Medutu itself. But now we have additional information from the papyrus of Hunefer, as well as some more Medutu in the text. So that's critical information. When you get the information, we print the text in color. We print on our own printers. So it's a very good text as a reference to have. Also for children to see the actual name, Afuraitkaitnit, in the Medutu of ancient Kemet, identifying us as the people, Afuraitkaitnit, of the land of the Creator and the land of the Creatress, as our identity. So those are the 5 publications in softcover that we just released in softcover. Of course, all of them already existed in PDF, and then we have the other 60 plus publications in PDF. Incrementally, we will be publishing a large number of them in softcover. Okay. Now, we had a couple of questions. Let's see. Okay, so just for the people who came in, we were just going over some of the publications that we just released. We put the link up, the NHOMA link, which is the publications link. And then we have a few questions I see here. So let's, the first one. Okay, so the first question is there such thing as permanent realignment with the Okraa? So what the question is asking, in our text, the Okraa complex, for people who are not familiar, the term Ka is a term for soul in ancient Kemet, the divine consciousness. The female version of that is Kat or Kait. So a male has a Ka, has a soul. A female has a Kat or Kait, a soul. In Akhan, in the language of the Akhan people, Ka is called Kra, and Kait or Kat is called Kra with 2 A's or Krawa. So we have that in the text. So the Okraa complex is talking about the soul of the person. In the Yoruba tradition, it's called the Ori Inu, the Inu, inner Ori, the inner head. In Bodun, it's called the Se, or the Se Lido, which is the divine consciousness. Your Kra, your Ka, your soul, your Kait, is a divinity. It's a force in nature that is assigned to your spirit pre-incarnation. So you, just like you're a spirit, you're a Sum Sum, as we say in Akhan, or Sahu in ancient Kemet, a Sum Sum that animates a physical body. When your spirit, when you make your transition, of course the spirit leaves the body, the body dies, and then you eventually go to the ancestral realm if you're living in harmony with order, if you don't get caught up earthbound and hanging out where you got killed or something like that, and you're haunting houses or hanging around spots on the corner where it's, some people get shot. Your spirits are still hanging around the corner where they got shot, where their blood was spilled, and they're causing all kinds of accidents and distracting people spiritually when they're driving at that corner and causing people to be distracted and run into other people and that kind of thing. But if you live somewhat in harmony with order, then you make your transition to the ancestral realm, Asamindo, as it's called in Akhan, and you live amongst the ancestresses and ancestors. When it's time for us to return, for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, and black people only, before our spirit is drawn back into the womb of one of our descendants, our spirit is drawn up to Amenet and Amen, Inyamewa and Inyame and Akhan, the great mother and the great father, the supreme being. We are given or assigned a spiritual force called a Okraa, a soul, a Ka, or a Kait. It's just like you have a body, but then you have a brain that regulates the functions of the body. You have a spirit body. You're a sum, you're a spirit, but you're given a quote-unquote spiritual brain or a Ka that dwells within your head region. It's a divinity that you can communicate with. It's assigned to you. When you communicate with that force that dwells within your head, it's always pulling you in the right direction, whether you align with it or not. Sometimes we align with that pull, and sometimes we don't. When we don't, we cause problems for ourselves. When we do, then we're in harmony with order. That divinity is assigned to us. Now we're a full entity. We're a spirit with a soul, with a divinity. Then we're sent back into the ancestral realm to await reincarnation. One of our descendants copulates with their spouse. That energy pulls our spirit from the spirit realm, ancestral realm, into the womb, and then 40 weeks later, we're back in the world and we're functioning again. So when we're engaged in disorder behavior, out of order behavior, we are disaligned from the crowd. All mental illness, all disorder, all problems come from some fundamental disalignment from the crowd. So the crowd is pulling us in one direction to live in harmony with every thought, intention, and action with the divinely ordered creation, and then we go against that because we're lusting after something, whether it's food or control or whatever it is, and we decide we're going to go in a different direction. We become disaligned, and that tension develops because we're disaligned from the cry. Our soul is forced in our heads, pulling us in this direction. We're moving in the other direction. And then that disconnect or that discordance causes tension in our lives, and it causes problems in our lives. And then we try to realign ourselves ritually. That's what ancestral religion is about. It's the ritual incorporation of divine law, the ritual restoration of divine balance. That's what Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion is all about. Nanasom is the term that we use. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion, no matter what form it takes, Yoruba, Akhan, Ewe, Igbo, Bambara, whatever it is, ancient Kemet, ancient Kanit, Nubia, we're still talking about the ritual incorporation of divine law, the ritual restoration of divine balance. Through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities that we need to harmonize with order, and through ritual, we restore balance to our lives where imbalance has occurred, and that's how we function harmoniously in the world. So when you become disaligned, then there's an issue, and we try to realign ourselves, and that's what spirituality is about. That's what becoming mature is about. Now, you asked about permanent realignment. The only time somebody is permanently realigned with the Kra, meaning they're living in harmony with divine order, Inyamewa, Inyame, and Sheshe, all the time, that force, that pull in the head that's pulling them towards order, and every thought, intention, and action, they actually align with that 100% of the time. That's when someone reaches the societal office of Nana in Akhan culture, or an elder, an honored elder, honored elderess. Somebody who lives, they become one of the Nananum Mpanyinfo, or that class of elders and elderesses who live in harmony with divine order at all times. That's spiritual maturity. That's perfection, meaning perfection only means that when your Okraa pulls you to engage in this kind of behavior, you go ahead and you don't reject it. You go ahead and live in harmony with that kind of behavior. You engage in harmonious behavior. You're a living example for the community because your every thought, every intention, and action is in harmony with divine order. You ascribe the value of order to every thought, intention, and action, and you express that and impress that as an example to the community. So permanent realignment means somebody who has reached that societal office, that level of maturation or spiritual maturity, and they move forward. That's what we move towards. It's no different than a baby, growing up to be an adult. Well, adults can grow into elderhood, spiritual maturity to become one of the NKOMMO if they engage that process. It's not automatic. Some people become elders and eldresses and they never reach that level and they engage in idiotic, nonsensical behavior. We call those kind of mpanyinfo or older people, they're called kwasea panyin. Kwasea in Akhan means stupid or foolish. So the kwasea panyin is a stupid or a foolish elder. And that's the kind of older person that you keep your children away from. That's the kind of older person that's an example of what not to be, and the community shuns that kind of older person. There's a difference between an older person and an elder. Every older person is not an elder. Every one of the mpanyinfo is not one of the nananom mpanyinfo or nana panyin. Some of them are kwasea, stupid or foolish, panyin, instead of nana, honorable panyin. But the only time you reach permanent realignment is when every thought, every intention, every action is in harmony with divine order. We have the capacity to function like that. In fact, we're designed to reach that level of functioning where we're not always being controlled by lust, misguided desire, old conditionings, foolishness like that. Through spiritual maturation, through ritual practice, you can get to the point where you're not, little by little, you start engaging in the process of, you may spend your younger part of your life, your 20s or something like that, you may spend 50 or 60% of the time not living in harmony with the Okraa, not living in harmony with that pull, and the other 40 or 50% you do. A couple of years later, ritual practice, spiritual maturity, you start getting to the point where you're 60, 70, 80% of the time you're living in harmony with order and you rarely get knocked off track. And at some point you grow to the point, if you're consistent, if you're disciplined, if you're focused, where you get to 100% of the time you're functioning that way, and then you become one of the non-unknown. So let me know if that answers your question. If you have any, if you had a follow-up. Okay. Okay, so the next question was, is the 40-day lingering of the spirit associated with 40 weeks of pregnancy before birth? Now, not particularly. This is, so what the question is about, in our Akhan culture, and it varies between the different groups, but it's very similar at the same time. When somebody makes their transition, when somebody dies, spirit leaves the body for a certain period, that spirit is still hanging around the family members. When somebody dies, whether they die a violent death or if they die of natural causes or, disease or whatever, the spirit separates from the body. Their spirit is still drawn to their family for a period. So while the people discover the person has died and they're upset, they're making funeral arrangements, the person's spirit is still hanging around the family members and some friends. They'll appear to the family members in dreams. Sometimes they'll just show up for those people in the family who are clairvoyant, a little bit clairaudient, meaning they can hear spiritually, they can hear and they can see spiritually. A little bit clairsentient, where they may not be able to see a spirit walking around or hear one walking around, but clairsentient meaning they can feel the energy in the room, or clairalien or clairgustant meaning they can smell or they can taste. Their sense of smell and taste changes when the spirit enters the room, or what we call clairtimian or clairequilibrant, but there's a change in the sense of the time continuum. When the spirit enters the room, they lose their whole focus of time, or their sense of balance, their equilibrium. is thrown off when the spirit moves through them. So they know, they can sense, whether it's through those different 7 senses, the spirit is around. The spirit typically does that because they're very often, they didn't want to leave at that particular time. They're still connected to their family members, so they interact with the family members to a certain extent. Eventually, a funeral happens, burial happens, the spirit still spends some time around the family members, but typically in our Akhan tradition, that lasts for about 40 days, and then that spirit begins to make its transition to what we call Asamaindo, the ancestral realm, the place of the Nsamanfo. Samain means deceased spirit. In English, that would be a ghost, but the spirit of that you can see of the person deceased. Nsamain Fo means the group Fo of Samain or Nsamain ancestral spirit, so that's just a plural. Samain is the singular, Samain Fo or Nsaman Fo is the plural. So the Nsaman Fo, the ancestral spirits, the realm of the ancestral spirits is Asamain Da, or the Asamai, the region or the ancestral realm. That spirit begins to make its transition to live amongst the ancestresses and ancestors. There's an Akhan Ebe or proverb that says if you want to know what the ancestral realm is like, or Asamando is like, consider the Adai state, which is the dream state. When you're dreaming, your body's in a dark room, you're still, there's no sound, there's no light, there's no activity at all, and your eyes are closed, of course. But your spirit, you may be having a dream, seeing luminous images, interacting with other entities, and so forth. If there's no light in the room, that means your spirit is engaged in luminous activity. It's the same thing in the death process. Your body's laying in the grave, but your spirit, motionless, dark, and so forth, but your spirit is interacting with other entities, luminous entities. So what happens is we make that transition. We begin to migrate basically after about a 40-day period to Asamando to live in the community of the ancestresses and ancestors. There are some people who don't make a smooth transition, so they end up hanging around just indefinitely around the family members because they don't make that smooth transition. They're still controlled by anxiety, controlled by lust sometimes, controlled by anger, and that magnetic energy holds them to the family, so they're still hanging around the family or hanging around the spot where they died or the house that they died in or the spot where they were murdered on the street or died in a car crash on the street or, like we said before, on a bridge where they committed suicide and jumped off the bridge. And then people who are walking by that bridge to cross that bridge to get to a store or something like that, every time they cross that bridge, they all of a sudden feel, they feel suicidal. And just this heavy energy of being suicidal comes over them. It's not because they're really feeling suicidal, it's because they're walking by that spirit, and that spirit, just like if a person today is going through a negative experience and their energy is so heavy, when you're talking to them and trying to, help them process the information, you can feel the anxiety emanating from them because their energy is so tense and anxious. Well, that energy doesn't leave when the person's spirit leaves the body. They still have that constricted, tight, discordant energy, full of anxiety. When somebody walks by that spirit, they can't see them, but the spirit is still standing there, and they can pick up on that energy, and they feel the same thing that the spirit is feeling. They feel suicidal. So some people, become earthbound, and they're hanging out like that, causing problems. The reason why we have Aye, or funeral celebrations, observances, the major reason is to help spirits make a smooth transition from the physical world to the ancestral realm, so they don't get caught up hanging around earthbound, because when they're anxious and upset and depressed, just like when people in the physical world, when they're anxious, upset, depressed, and angry, then they lash out at other people. When people make their transition and they're like that, they start trying to influence those who are receptive. So just like somebody can walk by that bridge and feel suicidal, somebody on the corner, like we said, who got murdered, anytime somebody drives at that stop sign and stops drives up to the stop sign and stops. They may cause the person to be distracted, moved into the person's sphere of awareness. The person doesn't know what's going on. They just feel distracted all of a sudden. They feel anxious all of a sudden. They lose their focus all of a sudden, and then there's a crash. So that corner is known for a number of crashes. Now, people who are spiritualists, they'll know, hey, something's going on. They go out there, if they're clairvoyant, they can see the spirit there. They do ritual for that spirit to help them, let them know you need to leave and you need to move to the ancestral realm. So we engage that process. That happens on the continent. That happens here in America as well. For people who are spiritually inclined, they do that kind of work on a regular basis. So, but that 40 days, it's not necessarily connected to the 40 weeks. It's a 40-day period, especially in our Akhan culture. We have a 40-day calendar. It's basically a 40-day inclusive calendar. It starts on a Sunday, Kwesi, and it ends on 6 weeks later on the following Kwesi, and those days are counted within that. So that 6-week period, or basically a 40-day period, plus the 2 ancestral observances, the bookends to those days, the first Kwesi and the last one, plus the 40 days in between, that every 42 days or every 6 weeks, there's an ancestral observance. And we go, that's a ritual calendar for us, but that's also kind of based around the time period that a spirit will remain in this realm, but at some point they need to start moving on. They need to recognize that they're no longer here, they're not going to be here physically. It's not their function to remain here and just cause problems. They need to move on and move to the ancestral realm. The funerary practices help that process. It focuses on the person who made their transition. It's not like funeral practices in European cultures where everybody is focused on how upset they are and totally neglecting the spirit of the person that's upset and anxious of the fact that they no longer are there. Our funerary practices focus on the spirit that actually departed and helps that spirit move on in a smooth transition so they don't hang around and cause problems, cause physical problems, cause anxiety, cause stress in family members and friends that leads to physical disease, heart disease, headaches, all kinds of things, financial problems, relationship problems, problems with employment, just a number of different things, because they're causing various kinds of discordant communication, which leads to bad decisions, which leads to negative effects in people's lives. So it's not necessarily connected to the 40 weeks, it's really connected to that 42-day ritual period that's perpetual in our Akhan culture. Every 42 days there's an ancestral observance. So we go through that cycle on a consistent basis. And then 2 of those observances equal up plus 7 days. So the 42 days is 84. So you have a 42-day cycle. Like, for example, February 16th was the last Kwesi, or sacred ancestral observance. 6 weeks later, it's March 30th. That's the next Kwesi. And then 6 weeks after that is the next Kwesi. And so we go to the ancestral shrine, we make offerings, we focus on what happened in the past 6 weeks and what we're going to do in the next 6 weeks, and getting information and direction from the NKOMMO to help us move along and get that infusion of, wisdom and things like that. So 2 42-day cycles is 84 days, plus 7, that's 91, and that's one of the seasons. That's a seasonal 13-week, from, for example, December 21st to March 20th, which is going from the winter solstice to the spring equinox. Okay. So let me know if that answered your question. Okay, so the next, hold on one second. Okay, so, well, quickly, one question was, do these concepts predate Kemet, or are they from the Kemetian culture? So the people of They predate Kemet because Kemet. Okay, so our people migrated from the south up into ancient Kemet. Some people, for example, ancient Nubia was called Kanat, or the Kanit land. Kan meaning first, force, from the front, the south land, the headland, the first land, and so forth. Kanit and Kanitu are the first people from the south, and so forth. So the Kanat land or the Kanit land is a title of ancient Nubia. So we were in that area, and that includes south of Kemet, where Sudan is now, but also further south and west. That is not the same borders that the Europeans have drawn for Sudan and Ethiopia and, you know, Chad and so forth, and Libya. South of Kemet, that wide area, even in the Saharan area, basically, we're talking about sub-Saharan, Afuraitkaitnit, that south of Kemet, west and east, that whole area, ancient Kanat, where we come from. So this, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years in these areas, and then at some point, some of us migrated up into ancient Kemet. Some of our people remained in the regions of ancient Kanat, what is now called Sudan or Ethiopia or whatever. Some people eventually migrated west after the Europeans began to invade, after the Assyrian invasion, Persian invasions, Greek invasions, Roman invasions, Arab invasions. At different times, some of us migrated west. Some migrated before the invasions, some migrated after the invasions. But we migrated some from Kemet, some from Kanit or Nubia, migrated west, established civilizations, for example, ancient Kana or Ghana, named after ancient Kanat or Nubia, the ancient empire of Ghana, then Mali, Songhai, Kanem, Bornu, Oyo Empire, the Kong Empire, the various empires, civilizations in the western part of the continent, central part of the continent. We just migrated out, reestablished the same culture. So when you talk about Yoruba, Akhan, Ewe, Igbo, Bakongo, Bambara, Ovambo, Mbundu, these various cultures, they're all connected to ancient Kanat, which goes back hundreds of thousands of years. Migrating up into Kemet, that was just an extension of the same ancient culture. And some of us migrated from Kemet and went further up into the so-called Near East, went into Southern Europe, went into Southern Asia, and eventually we went into North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean. But it started, of course, in Afuraitkaitnit. It didn't start in Asia. Nothing started in Asia. Nothing started in, you know, mythological places like Atlantis and Mu. That's nonsense that the whites and their offspring create to try to take agency away from Afuraitkaitnit people and say that civilization did not start with us, and on the continent it had to start somewhere else. So they manufacture this lost landism, is talking about lost lands, Lemuria, Mu, Atlantis, nonsense like that. They have to try to take agency away from us, so that's why they promote that. And then some just use Asiatic nonsense as though culture came from Asia, which is proven to be inaccurate archaeologically, anthropologically, as well as genetically when you deal with the DNA. So it's the ancient culture. Kemet was just an expression of that ancient culture. But it's fundamentally across the board, wherever you find black people anywhere in the world, whether it's Papua New Guinea, whether it's North Central South America, the Caribbean, Afuraitkaitnit, Southern Europe, India, whatever. When you look at the ancient cultures, you'll find linguistically we are related. You will find that cosmologically we have the same fundamental cosmology. You'll find that genetically you can find genetically tracing the Y chromosomal DNA as well as the mitochondrial DNA. You'll find the links there, but ritually you'll find the same deities by same names or the same descriptive titles. Sometimes the central name will be different, but the descriptive titles will be identical. And the same functions in creation and how we operate, it's all fundamentally the same. Okay. All right. Oh, I missed one question. You said the Oberima book, Afurakani Manhood, they are available. You asked if they were available for download and purchase. So, yeah, go to the link right above, right below your question, the NHOMA link. They're available soft cover as well as the free ebook download. Okay, so that was one question. And the next one. All right. Okay, so you said, does Akhan Nanasom, Nananoman Samanfo, or Nanasom answers Obi 9 divination? So you're talking about the Obi Abata. In the Yoruba tradition, there's divination. The different forms of divination. Obi Abata is one that's used, as well as Ifa divination. Erin de Lagoon to 16 calories. Then you have Ifa divination, which is using the Ikin, the palm nuts, or the Opele chain, which is another form of, way that Ifa is read, consulting Dafa, whatever. But then the Obi Abata is the Kolana divination. In the West, very often what took place, depending on where you were, in the Caribbean or in the South or whatever, some people started to use coconuts because we didn't have access to cola nuts. So that was one way it was done. Now, that's often used as a rudimentary form of divination for anybody who's involved in the culture. They would say the person doesn't have to be an Olorisha, a priest or a priestess. They don't have to be a Babalao or Ianifa to deal with Obi Abata. And so that's a divination system that people use to communicate with their Egungun, with their ancestresses and ancestors, even though depending on who is teaching, they can also use it to communicate with the Orisha, and also some people, they use it to pull Odu from using Obi Abata. So it just depends. But now different, your question is, in our Akhan tradition, is there something similar? The various traditions, inclusive of Akhan and various other traditions, all of them have numerous forms of divination. Numerous forms. So some have water gazing, some use shells, some use, Nserewa, cowries, some use a number of different things. The critical point is, and I saw another question you had asked on the other forum, so that just ties in. It can become mechanical if you're using Obi Abata. You ask a question and then you get an answer back. You get an Ijife, or you get Itawa or Alafio or Oyekun or Okanran, and then you throw again depending on what you get, and then you're told, well, if you get this, then it means this, it means that, it means that, and then sometimes you get what appear to be mixed answers. And so then it's confusing because one day you may get something here and it seems to confirm something, and then you do, divination the next day or the next week, and it seems to contradict what's going on. So this is a way to overcome that. First thing is, of course, you need to purify the area where you are. Sometimes people can be, you need to know who's answering. Is it the Egungun that you're dealing with who are answering the question, or are you being influenced by other Unsamanfo ancestral spirits or discarnate entities who are in the area, or your own energy is off, off center? This is one reason you purify yourself first, cleanse yourself, and then you move forward. But what we say, number one, you don't want to become just a technician, where you just memorize the Odu, memorize the patterns, memorize what the patterns quote unquote mean. You can cast the shells, but you need to be able to listen, see, hear, feel, know what these Egungun are saying, what the Orisha are saying. The way you develop that capacity, and any Afuraitkaitnit person can develop that capacity because it's within us. The first thing you do is you establish that ancestral shrine, NKOMMO, because we're part of a system. We're not just like, well, I want to communicate with the Nsamafo today, or the Egungun today, the ancestral spirits today, or sometimes I don't need them. I just want to deal with the Orisha, things like that. That's white nonsense. We are part of a system. Just like you have a physical body, like we said in the past, that's the great body. The smaller bodies within your physical body are the organs which regulate order within the body, and then the cells are the children of those smaller bodies, where you have the Supreme Being, Inyamewa, and Inyame, and Akhan, Amenet, and Amen in ancient Kemet, ancient Kanit, Mawu and Lisa in the Vodun tradition, Komosu and Chukwu in the Igbo tradition. We're all talking about the Great Mother and the Great Father. We have our own names for them. That's the Great Being. The children of Inyamewa Inyame are the organs. Those are the Abosom, the deities, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Arusi as they're called in Igbo, the Ntoru, Ntorutu, or Neteru, Netetu, more properly pronounced Ntoru, Ntorutu. These are the deities, the organs within the great divine body that regulate order in the body, regulate order in creation. And then the cells of the organs are us. We're children of the Abosom. Plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life, are the cells within the organs, are the children of the organs. Just like your liver has liver cells, and liver cells are children of the liver, then the different Orisha, Abosom, and so forth govern the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. We're cells and children of these Orisha. When we, as children, serve the Orisha, the Abosom, the Vodou, then we serve the whole body, just like if your liver cell supports liver functions, the liver cell is also supporting or living in harmony and contributing to the whole body, the Supreme Being as well. Now, the water in the body permeates the entire body. When a cell dies, some of the water that was in the cell reconnects with the larger mass of water within the organ of which it was a part, and it gets nourished and cleansed, and eventually a new cell is born with some of that material. The water in the body is like the ancestral realm in the great divine body of creation. So when we make our transition, our bodies are going to the Earth Mother, Asase Afua. We reconnect with our ancestresses and ancestors like the water in the body. They're like the water part of the system. They nourish us, rejuvenate us, cleanse us, and help us so when we return, we can return in a cleansed state and move forward. Throughout the life of the cell is constantly being cleansed and nourished and rejuvenated by the water within the organ. We as cells within the great divine body, as we live every day, we're constantly, not only physically do we need water to continue, you can't go too long without drinking water, you can't function naturally without drinking water, but spiritually you need to be cleansed and rejuvenated periodically with the entities that are part of the water system in creation, which is the Nsamafo, the non-known Nsamafo. So we're constantly cleansed by them, rejuvenated by them, and so forth. Just like physically, periodically we need to get some water throughout the course of the day in order to function properly. Now, that's the foundation, that's the cosmological foundation. You're not disconnected from the Nsamafo. It's not a choice. Just like the cells in the body, they can say, well, I don't want to drink water. I just want to get fed by the blood from the organs that has the power. I don't need no water. That's like somebody saying, I don't need to deal with no ancestral spirits. I want to go directly to the Orisha, directly to the Abosom. I just want the power. That's idiotic, number one. We learned that from the whites and their offspring. They just want to go to the top, quote unquote. But it's nonsense. Because just like your cells and your organs are not separated from the water, we are not separated from the non-known Nsamafo. There's a hierarchy. There's a Supreme Being, the deities, the ancestral spirits, and us, just like the great divine body, the organs, the cells, and the water that's within the cells, of course, that surrounds and nourishes and rejuvenates and supports cellular activity. So you're not disconnected from them. The first thing we must do is rededicate ourselves to periodic communication with the ancestresses and ancestors. Specific, honorable ancestresses and ancestors. Like we said before, you can have criminal deceased, then you have nananom nsamanfo. That's a different class of nsamanfo. Reconnecting with them on a periodic or consistent basis attunes your receptors. Your clairaudience begins to develop. Your clairvoyance begins to develop. Your clairsentience, or your ability to feel beyond or experience beyond the physical, begins to develop the more you engage these practices. Just sitting with the ancestral spirits at the ancestral shrine, pouring libations, sitting down to communicate in the form of susu-homa meditation. Communicating with them, asking questions and listening, you begin to get tuned up. So clairvoyantly, clairaudiently, clairsentient, clairalien, clairgusting, equilibrant, clairtimian, and we go into that in Sama and NKOMMO in the 7 senses, the various 7 spiritual senses. We go into that, but just to give you that basic breakdown, when you deal with the nsamanfo, that's when you begin to attune your receptors. So then when you do abisa, or divination, then you can, instead of just casting the shells, seeing the pattern, remembering what you told, what this pattern meant, and saying that must be the answer. No, when you cast the shells now, and you see the pattern, and you get the message of what it's supposed to mean, then you sit down, like you've been doing for the past, weeks, and communicate with your nsamanfo, and you ask them, is my interpretation of this correct? And if it's not, they will inform you, no, it's not correct. That's not what we're saying. So when you get a pattern, you don't just take it, record it, and then just say that must be what it is. You can ask the nsamanfo, or you can ask the abosom, is my interpretation correct? Is this what you're trying to tell me? It's no different than if somebody gave you some information over the phone and you repeat it back to them to make sure that's what they're saying. And if you're incorrect, they will correct you. But very often we're just taught, this is the pattern, this is the name of the pattern, this is what it means, and move forward. And then if you get something wrong the next day, or you get something totally different the next day, sometimes the priest or priestess will blame you for not being focused, or tell you, well, you just have to let it play out and, in everyday life and see what happens. And then they give you some gloss over what happened. And that's nonsense. And that's what happens in a number of ilays as well as abosom fie. It starts off with reestablishing a connection with your nananom nsamanfo, your egungun, your aku. Akutu in ancient Kemet is a term for illumined ones, ancestral spirits, honorable ancestral spirits, dealing with them specifically, kuvito and vodun, dealing with them specifically on a consistent basis. And we have an article, and the name of it is NKOMMO. And if you just go to the AKANFO NANASOM page, you'll find that I'm putting a link now. Okay, so in our AKANFO NANASOM page, we have the NKOMMO article. It says Ancestral Shrine Communication. We also have Nsama NKOMMO, Ancestral Shrines in Kemet, Nsama NKOMMO and the 7 senses, and then also Odwirafo and Akwamuman. And those are different articles dealing with ancestral shrines. It talks about establishing ancestral shrine. But the key to dealing with what we call in Akhan adebisa, or divination, is establishing that relationship with your nananom nsamanfo first. So then later when you begin to engage whatever form of divination you use, you're just not a technician. You're just not memorizing patterns and memorizing stories and memorizing what you've been taught and then just applying it. You cast, you get the reading, but then you ask the nsamanfo specifically, is this what it is? Ask the abosom specifically, is this interpretation correct? And they will give you various proofs of what they are trying to communicate with you. They'll give it to you directly while you're there. They give it to you in dreams. They'll give it to you in other people as a confirmation of what they gave you at the shrine to prove to you that that interpretation that you were able to confirm was the correct interpretation. You have to do that kind of investigation. In our Akhan culture, there are various forms of divination, various forms including not only what we received when we were on the continent of Afuraitkai, but then what we brought with us over here. So we're not dependent on anybody from the continent or the Caribbean or South America or anywhere else about doing divination. We're not dependent on anybody. We brought this divination within our Okra, Nemoja, our soul, and our blood. For example, in our Akhan culture, our culture was preserved in North America through what they call hoodoo, which is different from like New Orleans voodoo. Hoodoo, we have an article, the Akhan origin of the term hoodoo. So we go into detail about that. But typically when people are talking about hoodoo, it has a strong Akhan substratum, linguistically and ritually, although there were other groups involved in that. In other parts of the South, you will hear the term, of course, voodoo, like in New Orleans, that has a strong Fon and Eve and Mina substratum. The Congo is there as well. The term juju in North America typically is actually a Yoruba word. So typically when somebody said they went to the juju woman in North America, since we lost the language but we're still using certain terms, usually that was somebody who's descendant of Yoruba people, sometimes Congo people as well. But Yoruba people, they would use the term juju. Akhan people would use the term hoodoo. Fon and Eve people would use the term voodoo. We're talking about in North America, in the South, Northeast, Central, and so forth. So it wasn't just the Cubans, the Haitians, the people in Brazil, and other people who preserved their ancestral religion. We preserved ours under voodoo, hoodoo, juju, Gullah Geechee culture, and so forth. We never lost our culture. It's in your kra, your soul. It's in your blood, your moja. It's connected to your nsamanfo. So there are forms of divination that we brought with us that we can re-establish. Water gazing, dealing with shells, using stones. There are various ways to use divination, not just obiabata. So whatever's in your family that was carried from the continent through your blood circle, many of our people are brainwashed with Christianity, Islam, atheism, other forms of nonsense, but somebody in the family, you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great. So a few generations back, you're getting into the hundreds. Somebody in the family, some cousin, somebody, one of those ancestresses and ancestors, one or more, had some form of divination that they carried with them that's been in your family intergenerationally. You can reestablish that divinatory practice for yourself and for your family right here, and it's not dependent on you going to get initiated somewhere, because nobody can initiate you into that other than your own nsamanfo. And the abosom, the orisha, the vodou, who are connected to you, that was assigned to you pre-incarnation. We are assigned to abosom, orisha, vodou, arusi, pre-incarnation, and then we are sent into the world. So nobody can give you a divinity. You are born with that. Only Inyame wa Inyame Amenet Amenen can assign a divinity to you. And you bring that with you, that connection with you, into the world. The same thing is true of the ancestral forms of divination that we have in North America that we didn't receive from anybody else, that comes directly through our blood circles. But that again will come from you communicating with your nsamanfo, specifically, directly, and developing that as a skill, just like people working out, becoming more, powerful physically, developing that skill of being focused, dealing with your nsamanfo, communicating with them, pouring libations, sitting down and listening to them, and developing your spiritual receptivity so that when you engage the divinatory process through implements, then you get those results you're looking for. Anytime you ask anything spiritually, that's oracular communication. Because, in fact, the term for divination in Akhan is abisa or adebisa. Bisa is a verb that means to ask. So when you call bisa, you call or go, bisa, ask. When somebody says, me call bisa, me go ask, I'm going to ask, what they're saying, that's a euphemism for saying, I'm going to ask the priest or the priestess, I'm going to ask a question or consult the shrine. Bisa means to ask. Ade bisa, the term for divination, is things that are asked. So anytime you make an inquiry spiritually, you're engaged in a divinatory process right there. Anytime you sit down and ask your NKOMMO for a question, if you ask in a dream, or if you sit down in front of a shrine and ask a question, just spiritually, you're engaged in a divinatory relationship. That's an oracular relationship. So they're just different forms of asking. You can ask spiritually, internally, or you can ask the question and cast shells or use water or use whatever, and they will use the implements to answer externally what they've been trying to communicate with you internally. But again, it always goes back to dealing with your NKOMMO, establishing that line of communication, a more clear channel of communication, so then when you use Obiabato or any other system, you can ask them for the corrections, for the proper interpretation, and then you can move forward. But let me know if that answers the question. Okay, so you also had okay, so the Okraa altar setup, if you look in the Okraa complex text, in the section talking about the Kuduo, we briefly mentioned that. Now the way it is done in Akwamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, the Akwamu Nation in North America, we have a vessel, we have a representation of the abosom that governs our Okraa, and that's set out on a white cloth, but there are different ways to deal with that. That comes from ancestrally through Akwamuman. There are people in our Akhan tradition, as you know, because I know you checked out the information previously on the website and so forth. There's some people, because of the influence of Christianity, Islam, the infection of the culture, that they've gotten away from dealing with the Okraa. Some Yoruba people and some others, they also don't deal with that. They've been corrupted in a fashion where that's neglected, and their focus is doing rituals to get money or doing rituals to deal with discarnate spirits who are not really Orisha, not really Abosom, and just, you know, trying to hustle some money or hustle to get some power and influence over one person or an organization and so forth. So they're just dealing with deceased, discarnate relatives or non-relatives and getting these spirits to do something for them, and they'll kill an animal or release some energy to try to get the spirit to do something for them, just like when the person was alive, they'll give them some money or give them some drugs, energy, to go do something for them. And now when they're deceased, they would do the same thing. So they're not really dealing with the actual abosom. In our Khan culture, most of the people are not dealing with the Okraa because of the infection of Christianity and Islam, so they're not, a lot of them don't deal with the Okraa shrines, which actually is central to ancestral religious practice. It's no different than the Ka shrine in ancient Kemet. It's the Okraa shrine in the Akhan tradition, the Ibori shrine in the Yoruba tradition, the shrine for the Selido in Vodun. So that's a basic fundamental rudimentary practice of establishing that, is using that vessel, because in our Khan culture we wash our Okraa. It's called Afurakani. So we use that vessel of water to cleanse the Okraa, but we also have an image of the abosom that governs the Kra, our Kradim bosom, on the shrine, and whatever else the Okraa and NKOMMO will direct you to place on the shrine. But that's in the latter portion of the Okraa complex book. So let me know if that answers your question. And then I can send you some information as well. I can direct you to the Ning site where we talk about that in some more detail also. You also asked, is there an Akhan or Riki needed? There's the same basic fundamental Mpai Ba or Apai prayers. Let me put the link to the Ning site up there right quick. In fact, I'm gonna put, if you look on, no, if you just look on the AKANFO NANASOM page, and it says a sample vocalization, a sample prayer with an Akhan vocalization. It says a sample prayer from Kemet with an Akhan vocalization. So we know in the language of Kemet, when you study the Medutu, very often, sometimes they have the vowels and sometimes they don't, they just have the consonants. Some people will say that they don't have any vowels and they only use consonants, and that's really not accurate because some of the symbols actually represent the vowels, and we can prove that through the vocalizations in the Akhan language. So we use the vocalizations from the Akhan language. So if you're trying to figure out how to say a particular word, the Akhan language will have the vowels and still use the same word. For example, NTR is the way the divinity is spelled. Some people will say neter, and some people will say it different ways. In our Akhan culture, it is pronounced Toro. So the vocalization, and Akhan vocalization is an O between the T and the R and the O after the R. So it's not neter or neter, it's Toro. And an Toro is a divinity, it's a deity. That's a term for deity that we inherit via blood transmission. That's carried with us, that we are born with, an Toro. And then the female's Ntong, which is Ntorong, it's just shortened to Ntong. So that's Ntoro. And in ancient Kemet, it's really Ntoro and Ntorot, or Neter and Netert, the deity, god, deity, goddess. It's Ntoro, Ntorong in Akhan culture, and it means the same thing. So that sample prayer, that sample apai, with the vocalization in the Akhan language, is just a prayer from ancient Kemet. We lay out some of the Medutu, what they mean, and then we have a sample prayer that invokes the Supreme Being, the Great Mother, Great Father, the different divinities, and the ancestral spirits. It's a basic fundamental prayer, and you can use that. And anybody, any Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit person, and only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people can use that. Of course, the Whites and Arrow Spring, the Abosom, Ntorotu divinities do not communicate with them, never have, never will. So they can pray all day long, but nothing's going to happen. They're just going through the motions, manufacturing nonsense. But any Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit person can use that language of ancient Kemet that's found in that prayer, because that language is shared by our people all around the world. The fundamental words, fundamental concepts, divinities, you can find in the Afurakani languages, Niger-Congo languages, so-called Nilo-Saharan, so-called Afro-Asiatic, and so forth. But wherever we are found in the world, you can find those same terms with the same meanings in our various languages. So that's like a proto-language for us. So you can use that particular prayer until you find out directly from your Nsamanfo, because they will direct you towards what specific group you come from, and then you can start learning the language from that group. So you can use the ancient ancestral language, which is the mother language from ancient Kanat, Kemet, Nubian Egypt, and then as you do that, your Nsamanfo, your direct ancestresses and ancestors will direct you towards what specific group you come from and what language you need to look into. So if you find out that you're Akhan, you find out you're Yoruba, find out you're from Bakongo, then you start studying that language, and that's just a expression of the ancient mother language anyway. So that's the way to do it. So, and that includes, you don't have to have a specific, you're talking about oriki, which are praise, songs, praise poetry. Ori Inu are the praise songs in the Yoruba tradition. The oriki are like praise poetry, chants, and so forth for the different Abosom and Nsamanfo, Orisha, Egungun. You don't have to have that specifically. That basic prayer will help put you on the right track. And just consider, we do have praise songs. We have chants, we have, ritual prayers and things like that. But consider that there are people in the community, and it's always been the case, you have a small percentage, or maybe one person or a couple of people born in the community who are born deaf. So they can't hear the songs, they can't speak, and they can't, hear the praise poetry. But can they communicate with the Abosom and Nsamanfo spiritually? Of course they can. They're not banned from the culture because they're deaf. In fact, they have special attention from the Nsamanfo because they were born with that condition. And sometimes they are more receptive than the average person spiritually because of that, because they have extra protection. It's like we give extra protection to children who are born with birth defects, and the community protects them and, gives them privilege to a certain extent. The Nsamanfo do the same thing with children who are born with a certain birth defect, certain different kinds of birth defects, but also even culturally. We have been born, quote unquote, in America with a spiritual birth defect. We're born spiritually deaf. We can't speak. We don't have our tongue. We can't speak our ancestral language. We weren't born with that. We don't remember that. So we can't sing the songs in the language, speak, do the chants and so forth, because we were born without that knowledge on the surface. Because we were born spiritually mute, so to speak, then we're given that extra protection by our ancestresses and ancestors who know what we went through over these centuries, and they put us back in place. And sometimes you'll find that black people born in America, born in places where they're separate from the continent, separate from the culture, separate from different things, they'll have more insight and intuitively into the nature of the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, into the functioning of the ancestresses and ancestors than some people who have been dealing with the culture and just kind of taking it for granted, because we're given that extra protection or that extra attention by the Nsamanfo because we were born with this spiritual, quote unquote, temporary birth defect of being mute where we can't speak. So they'll make sure that they place us back into the ancestral family or great ancestral clan that we come from, give us that knowledge, and direct us to begin studying whatever culture that is. So if you find out from your Nsamanfo, you'll establish that shrine, communicate with your Nsamanfo in the language of ancient Kemet, and those ancient ancestresses and ancestors, as well as some of your recent, will come forward at some point and direct you towards which group you come from. The last time you lived on the continent in the previous incarnation, were you living in the Congo? Were you living in Akhan culture? Were you a member of Bambara Nation, Senufo, whatever it is? They will remind you of that. Stimulate your Okraa, your ancestral memory of where you were, what group you came from. Then you'll begin to study that language, and you'll notice that that language resonates with you more than any other Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit language, that you come in contact with, of course, because that's the language you used to speak the last time you were here in the world. That's your ancestral language directly. So the ancient mother language is the language of ancient Kanat and Kemet, Nubia and Egypt, but the specific expression of it, as we migrated west, central, and south, you will find that central expression in your own blood circle. Your Nsamanfo will share that with you, and then you embrace that, and you'll notice that that will help you to realign. So you don't have to have a specific ritual song and so forth up front. You deal with that language of ancient Kemet, or even if people didn't have that, just the fact that they establish a shrine, sit down, and have the desire to commune with their direct blood, honorable ancestresses and ancestors. Our honorable ancestresses and ancestors will see that and will come and communicate, show through imagery, direct you to things on the internet, images of who they are, who you are, what culture you come from, put people in front of you who speak that language, put people in front of you who confirm what you're given spiritually in dreams and at the shrine and other places, and they will put you back on track. All right. Okay, so we got a bunch of questions. I just want to see if any of them are similar so we can, let's see. Okay. Okay, so the question after that. Okay, looks like I missed one. So, somebody asked, can you briefly explain divine law and divine hate? Okay, so now we do have that publication, Divine Law and Divine Hate, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can download that directly from the NANASOM page. That is the next publication that we will be releasing this week in softcover form, as well. Of course, it's already in PDF on the website. Check the AKANFO NANASOM page, the same link that I put up. So all 5 parts are there. We're going to put all 5 parts into the text in one text. We'll make it, of course, PDF like it already is, but it'll be combined. Then we will also have the softcover version, but we will also have an appendix with some new information. So we can just briefly, as you said, go through it. The term law or love is the same term, for example, in ancient Kemet. If you look at the Coptic term, the term mer, or spelled M-R, but mer or mar means love, desire, and so forth. But in Coptic, the late Kemet dialect is pronounced meh. Now the term for law is also in Coptic, the late Kemet dialect that came into use about 2,000 years ago, is also spelled meh. So meh meaning law, meh meaning love. Law and love is the same concept in our culture. It's the same word, but it's also the same concept in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit culture. So when you're in law with something or someone, when we talk about in love, that's a European concept. They're talking about lust. Falling in and out of love, they're talking about falling in and out of lust. For us, love and law is the same word. Even in the European representation through their phonetic script, which is taken directly from our phonetic script, they just tweaked it a little bit, corrupted some of the forms, but the letters that they use, they never created an alphabet. These various letters come directly from the phonetic script of ancient Kemet. Europeans never created an alphabet. That includes Sanskrit, that includes Arabic, that includes so-called Hebrew, Proto-Sinaitic, the Latin letters, Greek, all of them, they have their origins in the phonetic script of ancient Afuraitkaitnit, ancient Kemet. And when you show a chart of those various scripts next to the phonetic characters, you'll find that they're the exact same characters. So even LV and LW, love and law, the W, of course, came into being. First there was a V a few hundred years after that. It evolved into the W, evolved into the U, and then evolved into the W. So of course a U, and then a W is W, or 2 U's side by side, but sometimes it's 2 V's side by side, because V, U, and W are interchangeable in European languages. That's why some people say Sweden, some pronounce it Sweden with the V. They'll say William, but then other Europeans will say Wilhelm, because V and W are the same letter. Fundamentally, they have the same root, morphologically, so and phonetically. LV and LW is the same word, love and law, but that comes from ancient Afuraitkai, when law, meh, is also the word for love, meh. So when we talk about being in love with someone, some entity, that means we're functioning in harmony with divine law with respect to that individual, object, deed, entity, and so forth. We're engaged in a lawful relationship, representative of divine order. That's what law is. Law is an instrument that allows us to establish and bring balance to our lives. When you adhere to law, then you bring balance to your life. Ma'a and Ma'at are the male and female abosom or orisha or divinities, Vodou, of law. The term Ma'a, which becomes meh in Coptic, Ma'a in the ancient dialect, is the male divinity of law, and then Ma'at is the female divinity of law. There is Ma'a and Ma'at. It's not just Ma'at. not just the female divinity, there's a male and female divinity. They're the expansive and contractive poles of law. Law is the expression of order. So through law, you express order. Law is the instrument that attracts balance to your life. So if you adhere to law, for example, the laws that govern your digestive system, if you adhere to those laws and you put the things in your body that's harmonious for your body, then of course you bring balance to your life, your health. Health is just balance. If you veer away from the laws that govern your digestive system, then you cause problems. Obesity, other forms of disease, kidney disease, and everything else. So adhering to law attracts balance to your life. It's the same thing when we talk about love attracts your balance to your life. You notice that the term ma'at, as well as the term ma'ar, meaning love, they'll use the medut, or the hieroglyphic symbol of an eye, which is dealing with insight. You're being able to see or detect or to inspect, to view what's in harmony with order, what's not, so that you can attract that order to your life. That's law. But then, quote unquote, love, meh, you're still, through the eye, you attract your balance to your life. Complementary balance, male and female. Of course, it's not male and male, not female and female. We don't deal with dissexuality, homosexuality, that perversity. We're talking about complementary opposites. Through the eye, that symbol for law, it's also the symbol for love. In the medutu, meh, as well as meh, law and love, it's that eye, that inspection, that capacity to see and attract balance to your life, whether it's the complementary opposite or adhering to law to bring balance to your life. So when you bring balance to your life, you attract balance to your life through harmonizing with law. Then your sphere of influence expands, because now you can function harmoniously. If you don't, adhere to law, then your sphere of influence contracts. If you don't adhere to the laws that govern your digestive system, then you're not going to be able to function fully at your optimum as you normally would. You don't have the access to the fullness of the energy that you potentially have been given. Now your nerves constrict, or your blood vessels constrict, and you can't function fully. But when you adhere to law, then you attract balance to your life. You attract the resources necessary to function at your optimum fully, and then your sphere of influence expands. So we say law is the expansive pole of divine order. The contractive pole of divine order is divine hate. Hate is the rejection of disorder for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of the divine order. So just like you have an immune system, you have a respiratory system and circulatory system where you breathe in all the time. You're taking in, oxygen. You take in, elements from the air, but sometimes you take in toxins as well. You eat food, it gets into your bloodstream. You get the vitamins, minerals, nutrients. It takes in everything, but it also takes in toxins. It accepts everything. It accepts. But your immune system separates out things that you don't need, and it rejects or repels and destroys. Your body is constantly developing cancerous cells, about one out of every 100,000. Your immune system isolates, destroys, and repels them to maintain the integrity of your system. So just like law is the expansive pole of order, hate is the contractive pole of order. It is the impressive or impression of order. Law is the expression, hate is the impression. Through divine hate, we impress or imprint upon creation the parameters within which we need to operate. So that's what divine hate does. Your immune system, lymphatic system, both immune and lymphatic, are the agents of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. The Supreme Being hates disorder, so our culture is about the acceptance of order and the rejection of disorder. Through law, we accept order. We draw balance to our lives. We accept order into our lives. Through hate, we reject disorder. We repel disorder so we can maintain the integrity of our system. If we didn't have hate or rejection, we'd just accept anything and everything, including those things that would totally destroy us. That's dietarily, but that's also socially, that's also spiritually. The whites and their offspring are the cancerous cells in the body of black humanity. Black people are the original people and the only people created. The whites and their offspring are cancerous cells that develop within that great black body, and because they've been allowed to proliferate recently over the past 100+ years, they've been expanding through the black body like a cancer, consuming everything in its place. And they will consume the entire body until we recognize they are the enemy. White Asians, white Europeans, white Hispanics, white pseudo-Native Americans, non-black people. These are spirits of disorder, spirits without an Okraa. And we go into detail about that in the Okraa complex book. But we have to arrest their development, exterminate these cancerous cells so that the black body can function normally. If we do not, they will continue to consume and destroy, just like they move through the earth from northern Europe to southern Europe, Afurakan, the Near East, the Far East, Southern Asia, North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean. Everywhere they have gone, they've murdered and tried to destroy everything in their path, and they are constantly on that path, whether it's chemical and biological warfare, cultural warfare. They're pushing dissexuality, homosexuality, trying to force it in Afuraitkaitnit, all over North, Central, and South America, the Caribbean, Asia, wherever our populations are. That's where this cancerous group is, forcing their will. They're trying to force their will. So through law, we accept that which is harmony within divine order. Through hate, we reject or repel that which would bring disorder and discordance within the divinely ordered structure. But we go into detail about that. We talk about it in the Okraa complex book, but also in the series Maranechi, Divine Law and Divine Hate, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And be looking for that coming up as far as the soft cover version. But let me know if that answers the question. Okay, and the brother said a video breaking down Maranechi would be good. Now, in one of our videos, in fact, two of them, the Akradin Bosom video talking about Heru Behudet, but the first one talking about Abina, which is Sekhmet. So Heru Behudet and Sekhmet are the male and female poles of divine hate. They're the deities, if they even have the term hate within their names. So hate is just as divine as law or love. There's divine love or law, Ma'an, Ma'at, actually those divinities. Het Heru, when they talk about Het Heru being the goddess of love and beauty and so forth, that's talking about sensual attraction. That's the precursor to sexual activity and the replenishment of its harmony, which is pleasure. So that's talking about Het Heru, Oshun, Afi in the Akhan tradition, Afua. But that's sensuality. But we're talking about love, which is actually law. Then that's Ma'ah and Ma'at, the male and female Abosom or Orisha Vodou of law. The expansive pole of order. The contractive pole of order is governed by Heru Behudet and Sekhmet or Sechima in ancient Kemet, called Benna and Abena in Akhan. They're called Ogun and Iyami Abeni, one of the Iyamis in Yoruba tradition. So that male and female, those male and female divinities govern the impressive pole of divine order, whereas Ma'an, Ma'at govern the expansive pole or the expressive pole. So law is the expression of order, hate is the impression of order. Law is the expansive pole of divine order, hate is the contractive pole of divine order. Just like you have, expansion and contraction when you breathe. You inhale, you expand your lungs, but then you exhale, you have to force out the things that you don't need to remain in the system. You have an expansive and contractive aspect of the palpitation of life. You have the expansive pole of order and the contractive pole of order, and they're governed by Ma'an, Ma'at, and Heru Behudet and Sekhmet. Okay, so but in the Abena video, we go into detail about Maranechi and divine law and divine hate, and we mentioned it also in the Benna video on our YouTube page. But we will do a specific video just on Maranechi. After we release the soft cover version, we're going to do a video specifically on that. Okay, let me just go back through real quick and see if I missed anything. One question the sister had is the Eurasian the first offset of regeneration? So let me answer it this way. If you look in the Okraa complex book, let me type that in right quick. Okay, so in the Okraa complex book, The Soul of AKANFO, we have a section called Race and the Okraa. Now the Europeans, the difference between the whites and their offspring and us, of course, physiologically, we're melanin dominant. Morphologically, we have different morphological characteristics, talking about the shapes of the bones and ratios between, you know, arms, legs, torso, and so forth. And then culturally, of course, we're different. But specifically, the difference between us and all non-Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people is that they do not have a Kra, they do not have a Ka or Kait, soul, the divine consciousness, and we do. That's the difference between us. And when they, first, of course, they were all black people, just like you have all cells in your body. We talked about 1 out of every 100,000 cells at any given time has become cancerous, which means it doesn't look like the other cells anymore, it becomes disfigured, and it no longer functions as the other cells. It seeks to consume and destroy the other cells instead of living in harmony with the other cells. So it doesn't look like them anymore and it doesn't function like them anymore. The response, the divinely ordered response to cancerous cells is to isolate them, exterminate them, and expel them from the body. And that's exactly what the immune system, lymphatic system does. Immune, lymphatic are 2 halves of a whole, basically, which are the seats of Bena and Abena within the body, or Herubehu dead and Sekmet, Ogun and Iyami Abeni. So, because of that, so just like that happens in the body, that happened within the great body of humanity, a small portion engage in that disordered behavior. When you engage in disordered behavior, somebody asked a question about alignment with the Kra, you can repel your Kra. It's a divinity. It's a force in nature. It's an elder. It's an elderess. It's a force in nature. It is an abosom that dwells in the head region. No different than somebody visiting you. This is a force in nature that's assigned to you by the Supreme Being. It's your own personal abosom, your own personal orisha, your own personal vodou that's assigned to you to guide you through life. So you communicate with that divinity to ask what direction you should be going, how you need to function harmoniously in the world. If you're engaged in certain activities, how should you execute those functions without creating disorder in the process? How can you do that? And you learn that from your Okraa because it's encoded within your Okraa. It has that assignment from Nyame wa Nyame. Just like you may assign somebody to help your child, go through a certain process in school, and they ask that person questions. It's, a tutor or something like that. That abosom, that force, it's not just a magnetic pull in your head. It's the reason you feel that pull is because it's a divinity that dwells in that region. If you engage in disorder, you disalign yourself from that divinity, which means there's a discordance there, there's a tension there. If you continue to engage in disorder, in blatant disrespect or rejection of the Kra, then you repel the Okraa. It's like if you have, like we said before, if you have 2 magnets on a table and the opposite polarities are facing, if you move them close, they'll automatically attract and jump to each other and connect. If for some reason the other magnet is, one of the magnets is reversed and the polarity is reversed, now you have the 2 like polarities facing. As soon as you move the magnets close together and let them go, they will repel each other. Now, if you reverse, quote unquote, your polarity and begin to engage in disordered behavior on a consistent basis, now you become repulsive to and repelled by your Okraa. You will repel your Okraa, and your Okraa will disengage from the head region, and eventually, if you continue, that Okraa will return to Nyame wa Nyame, and you will have no Okraa anymore. Now you'll be a spirit without a soul. You'll be a spirit without a divinity in that region. You're like a body without a brain. And now you're a disordered entity. Your Okraa is that anchor in order that's within your being. If that anchor is gone because you repelled it, now you're a spirit that doesn't have an anchor in order, and now you're just a discordant, disaligned, disordered spirit. The whites and their offspring, because some of them began to engage in disordered behavior and continued, they repelled their Okraa. Your Okraa is a divinity. It does not dwell in disorder. It's not required to. So if you engage in child molestation or rape or murder or dissexuality, homosexuality, that perverse energy that you're generating, engaging in those practices, your Okraa will not dwell in that. It will disconnect from you. And if you continue in those kinds of behavior, or others, those are just examples, but if you engage in that kind and you're consistent in that kind of disordered behavior, you have reversed that polarity. You are repulsive to the Okraa, and you will be repelled by the Okraa, and it will disengage. And that's what happened. That's once that Okraa disengaged from those individuals, then eventually their abatum, or melanin, disengaged as well. It wasn't just the climate living up in Northern Europe because they were exiled or forced up into Northern Europe. That is true, and that has to do with their morphological characteristics, their corrupt bone structure, lips, nose, cheekbones, you know, that structure and so forth. That goes for Western Eurasians and Eastern Eurasians, which are Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and so forth. They're all the same people genetically and spiritually. They are spirits without an Okraa. They are the same people. Western Eurasians, Eastern Eurasians. And Eastern Eurasians migrated over through the Bering Straits and in other ways to North America and other parts of the Western Hemisphere, and they became what now they're mislabeled Native Americans. Now when they got here thousands of years ago, we were already here because we had already migrated here first. From Afuraitkaitnit, we did not originate in ancient America. We migrated to ancient America before Asians existed, before Europeans existed. We had already migrated over here. So when the Asians got here, we were already here. So of course they're not indigenous, they're not native, they're not anything but invaders. And then they waged war against us when they got here. And some of them tried to enslave some of us, and when they connected with their Western European brothers, when it was expedient for them to do so, they enslaved our people when they could. So they're just as much as the enemy as anybody else. But the Western Eurasians, Eastern Eurasians, they don't have a Okraa. They don't have a spiritual grounding in divine order. They don't have a divinity that governs them. So they're spirits of disorder. It's like a chicken with his head cut off and is running amok. The spiritual head is gone and they engage in disorder. So that's the difference between us. And then eventually, of course, when the spiritual degeneration took place, that repulsion took place, eventually the physical degeneration manifested, which it was going to do naturally, and the black substance within them left them as well. So through incest and inbreeding and so forth, they produced this higher incidence of albinisms and autoimmune diseases like vitiligo, and then you have this large population in Europe birthing physiologically these white-skinned, blonde-haired, light-eyed babies that never existed as a group in the world before, but then spiritually, most importantly, they don't have a Okraa. And they don't have the capacity to receive another Okraa as well. They engaged in disorder, they repelled the Okraa, and they will continue to engage in disorder until we make them extinct. And that's the only solution for them. Okay. So let me see. Just want to make sure we didn't miss anybody. Okay, Medase, I appreciate that. He said the information was helpful. A couple of people. Okay, I want to back up. I think there was one that I missed. Okay, so you said when describing the magnetic pull, you mentioned drawn is the word related to coagulation. Um, not necessarily. Just using the term drawn is trying to use a word that can kind of encapsulate what's happening. Sometimes you can, just on a lower level, you can feel a pull, literally you can feel a pull in your head in that region when you're about to do something, you're going in a certain direction and you need to be going in a different direction. Your Okraa will try to communicate with you, but if you can't hear spiritually, you can't see, at least you will feel an electromagnetic pull on the lowest level or a repulsion from a certain thing. Now, the more you develop your receptors spiritually, and you don't have to be, some super mystic or anything like that, that's nonsense. We already have it within us to connect like that. Some people, just the fact that you can think about somebody and focus on somebody you haven't talked to in months or even years, and then you focus on them intently, and then the phone rings and that person is, just called you and you said, hey, I was just thinking about it. Just the fact that you can engage in that process shows you that just like cell phones can reach across the world using the ionosphere and so forth, we can communicate the same way. We have a magnetosphere. It's governed by Yah and Abba, Nekabet, and Wachet. The Earth has a magnetosphere. We're connected with that, so we can communicate and send signals and so forth. So you'll feel, even just on an electromagnetic level, pull or draw or repulsion from certain activities for certain individuals and so forth. So that's what we were talking about. It's not necessarily a coagulation. I mean, you can use that terminology if you were thinking more so about an integration of the, Sum with the focus of the Okraa if you wanted to, but we were just using drawn in the sense of you can feel that pull, and then sometimes you can feel the repulsion. Sometimes the pull is from the Okraa, your own divinity within you that's pulling you in that direction. Sometimes it could be from one of the forces of nature that is connected to you in our bosom that's trying to encourage you in a certain direction. Sometimes it can be from an ancestral spirit that's just trying to encourage you in a certain direction. Sometimes it can be from a discarnate non-relative who may not have your best interest at heart, trying to direct you into a situation you don't need to be moving towards. That's why it's critical to begin to engage the process of communicating with your Kraa and communicating with your Nsamafo, so you can tell the difference between, is this pull coming from my own Okraa? Is it coming from the Nsamafo, ancestral spirits? Is it coming from some discarnate entity that doesn't have my best interest at heart? Is it coming from the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou? It's not as difficult as some people will make it seem. It's no different than a mother and a father can tell when they have a newborn. At some point they can learn the difference between the cry of the newborn. Is the cry because the baby is hungry? Is the cry because the child is in pain? The child can't sleep. There are different, they cry in a different way, and we can detect what's the difference. We know when it's something that has to do with pain, or if they're just, upset, or if they're hungry or whatever. You can tune into that because you tune your receptors and you know the differences. It's the same thing with detecting and determining, is the pull that's coming from the head, from the Okraa, is it coming from the Nsamafo, the Abosom, or a discarnate entity? The more you deal with the Okraa, you'll be able to have more detailed communications where you'll be able to see the divinity that is the Kraa. You'll be able to hear, so it's not just a pull, it's a full communication. You develop a full communication with that entity. All right. Okay, so that's I think I got most of the questions through. If I did not, you can always send us an email. I'll put the email address here. And you can always ask via the website, the Ning site, our network. You can always get on the network in that fashion. We have the Afuraitkaini.ning.com is a network similar to Facebook. It's something that's a private network on the Ning platform that we own. You know, we have to pay for that monthly fee or whatever. So it's not, you know, it's not just anybody joins. We have a sign up, you know, process. It's only for people who are involved in the culture. Of course, it's only for our people who are really, you know, focused and want to, you know, deal with some real information. But you have a profile page. You know, you can post links. We have the forum discussions. We post all of the videos and all the information that we do here, as well as on the website and links to the website. People discuss information. Of course, you can connect with other people who are studying the same things. We have people from Afuraitkaini people, of course, from America, but also from the continent, the Caribbean, from Europe, people around the world who are studying Nanasom, ancient Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion and its various expressions and cultures. So I'll give you the link to that site as well, because you can always ask questions on that site. Okay, so you can always ask questions on the Ning site, but you can also go to the search window and just type in a keyword that you're asking about, because there are hundreds of discussions. Very often the question you asked, somebody else has asked that question. In the past, we've had the site up for a little bit over 5 years, so there are a number of discussions, a number of blogs. So sometimes, whether it's health or ritual practice or divination or whatever it is, you know, revolution, resolution, whatever the topic is, you key it in, and very often people have, you know, asked that question, and we've had some kind of discussion, or at least a video or some link to some information, publication or something that deals with it. So if you haven't joined that site, you can join it. You can join it right away. It looks like we're going to end it here because it's 11 o'clock. Let me just make sure the last few questions. Okay, Yerase, Yeni Aseda. All right. So again, let me give you one last link, and you can share this link with others. Okay, so again, we had the NHOMA page before, but a week and a half ago we changed it. So instead of just having one ebook on that page, we changed it. Now we have the specific 5 books that we have, not only in ebook form, but also the soft cover versions, because people have been asking for the soft cover versions. So we print those out, as we said earlier. We do the printing ourselves in color, so all the books are in color. You can get the soft cover version of the Kuku Tuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, Uben Shane, the Ancestral Summons, Alberima, Afurakani Manhood, the Okraa complex that we spoke about a lot tonight, dealing with the nature and function of the soul. It includes information about patrilineal and matrilineal, or patricircular and matricircular deities that govern our blood circles and how we attune with them, the nature of the Kait, the Okraa, the Okrawa, the Ori Inu, and our nature as Afuraitkaini people, and how to function spiritually, and what the nature of ancestral religion is about, and cosmology. So that's all there. And then we also have Afuraikai, the origin of the term Africa. And again, we go into detail to show the Medutu, the specific hieroglyphs where you can find the term Africa in the hieroglyphs, talking about the original landmass created by Ra and Ra'at at the beginning of the world, proving, again, like we said, we were the first to prove that. Any scholars have been writing about that for over 100 years, actually about 400 years, going back to Leo Africanus 500 years ago, trying to figure out the etymological origin of the term Africa. We were the first to be able to publish and prove where that term comes from. And then we also, disprove all of the false etymologies. The same is true of the Kuku Tuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, which is also on the link, the NHOMA link. We show the etymological origin of the various fictional characters, like we said earlier: Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, David, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Buddha, Brahman, all these different characters. We show how they were manufactured, what deities from Kemet they took information, descriptive titles from, and they used to manufacture these fictional characters and pretend like they existed in the physical world. We give the proper etymologies. People have read books by European scholars over the past 100+ years, whether it's Massey and other people, trying to, decipher and sometimes deliberately misleading people about where these names come from. People in our community have often repeated misinformation coming from Gerald Massey and other writers, Greenberg and others, about the etymologies of the name Abraham or Isaac or Ishmael or Jesus or Moses and so forth. And 90+% of the etymological origins that they give in their writings and that some of our people repeat are 100% inaccurate. So whether it's Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, David, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Buddha, they may have gotten Buddha correct dealing with Ptah as far as the etymology, but those other ones, totally inaccurate. So we were the first again to publish the actual etymological origins of the names of these characters, and then we show cosmologically where the deities from Kemet fit into the scheme of creation and how the whites and their offspring took texts from Kemet, copied fragments of them, perverted the fragments, and then presented these characters as white, physically existing people in the world in Palestine or in Arabia, and then later in India. So we were the first to do that, and that's why that Kuku Tuntum, as well as the Afuraitkaitnit book, those are groundbreaking in the sense that for the past 100+ years, people have been getting these things wrong. We were able to do it with the help of the NKOMMO, and then, of course, not only spiritually giving the information, but then NKOMMO not only give you things spiritually, they carve these things in the walls, wrote these things on papyri, and direct us to the specific locations of these things so we can share that information with our community. And now people in the community can go to those exact same texts and find that exact same information that has actually been staring people in the face for decades. Some of the people have been saying that, Africa comes from the Greeks. They have the same papyrus of Ani. They've had it in their library for 20 years. Afurakani is right there talking about the origin of creation. Chapter 17, plate 7 of the papyrus of Ani, you'll find Afurakani. In chapter 17, plate 5 of the papyrus of Funefer, you'll find Afurakani talking about the original landmass of Earth that Ra operated through. These people have these texts, but because they're listening to the whites and their offspring, that same text that they could open up right now and see it laid out, they never took the time to look at it because the whites and their offspring said, no, it comes from the Greeks. So they repeated, this comes from the Greeks. And then this became a false canon, a false dogma within the so-called Afrocentric scholarly community. And you'll find people repeating this nonsense even today. You'll find people using the term Al-Kabulan as well, as though that's an original indigenous name for the continent, which it is not. It's an Arabic title. It's an Arabic corruption of a title. It just means the land between the two mountains, and it's an Arabic corruption. But people didn't know that. They assumed that it must be an original indigenous name. It actually can be found, and we mention this in the book Afurakani, the origin of the term Africa. Leo Africanus, 500 years ago, wrote that he gave the false etymologies of Afrik, meaning not cold from Greek, or Afrika, meaning sunny land in Latin, and different false etymologies because they couldn't figure out the origin of the term Africa. And then he said the Arabians and Ethiopians used the term Al-Kabulan, and he spelled it with an M instead of an N, Al-Kabulan. This is in 12,526, or the year 1526 AD, so-called AD, when he wrote that. Some of our people copied that and said Aakhuamuman is an ancient indigenous name for the continent. And some of our people have named their children that, named their schools that, named their programs that, and it's actually an Arabic title. So we show the actual origin of the name Aakhuamuman. We're the first people to show that cosmologically, where did the deity Kebu come from? Who is Kebu, the north wind divinity in ancient Kemet? What does Gebel mean? Gebal mean? El Gebalium, El Gebalain. We go into detail about all of that. Afura and Atem, and how these divinities are connected. The ram-headed divinities, the south wind and the north wind in Kemet, which is the south wind in Europe, while they call Afrikas, the south wind deity, is actually Kebu, which became Al-Kebu, later Al-Kebulan, the north wind divinity in ancient Kemet that's connected to Atem. So we go into detail cosmologically about all that to prove the origin of the term Aakhuamuman in the context of talking about, and that's in part 3. There are 4 parts of the book. In part 3, one section of part 3, we talk about the origin of the term Aakhuamuman. Again, nobody is, until we published that, and we first published that portion in 13,008 or 2008. Prior to that, nobody knew where the name Aakhuamuman came from, and they didn't know what the name meant. So we've been able to put this information out through connection with the NKOMMO, but then of course the NKOMMO don't just give you things spiritually, they will prove to you and direct you physically to tangible evidence of anything that they give you spiritually. So people can go to the walls, they can go of Kemet, they can go to the papyri, they can go to the sarcophagus text, coffin text, and so forth, Meru pyramid text, and find this information. The same thing deals with the the publication More Means Dead. We're the first people to give, a proper etymological breakdown of the origin of the term More, showing that it actually means dead, and the various definitions you find in European languages. All of those definitions can be found in the language of ancient Kemet. We show them in due to the hieroglyphics and show cosmologically how all of those terms are united, connected to the land of the inundation, burial, submergence, death, as a precursor in some instances to resurrection. But we go into detail about that. That'll be another softcover publication. It's already in PDF form, free as a download on the website. We will do a PDF version of that as well. So let me just check one more, make sure we didn't miss anything else. Okay, last question was Adebisa, which is divination. People are still on the list. You can check out our Adebisa page for those who are not familiar. We did get, when we put the information out, we did get inundated with a number of requests. So we have to do it in between doing everything else. So I know people have been waiting for a minute. Everybody we spoke to and emailed, you are still on the list, so we haven't forgotten about anybody. We had a couple of people we spoke to directly on the phone, and we had other people who emailed us directly through Facebook, as well as our other email accounts. So you're in line. Nobody jumped in front of you. Some people it took a few months to get to, so we're still working through that process. But we did get kind of inundated with requests, which is fine, but we just it just takes time to get through everything. So you're still in line, and we'll be contacting you in the next, some people within this week, and then some other people in the next couple of weeks. All right. So Medase and Yedase, we thank you for coming, checking us out. Check out our website. Check out our various publications, the free downloads as well as the videos. If you have any questions, hit us up through the Ning site as well as the email address. Check Odwirafo.com. We are planning an event for the DC, Maryland area, but we will be actually in the district in DC. We're planning tentatively March 22nd, but we'll find out in the next 2 days, and we will be putting that up on the website and on Facebook and on the Ning site. And then we plan to be in Texas the weekend of April in Houston, tentatively the weekend of April 19th. We will be giving the details of that within the next week or so. So if you have any other questions, again, just send us an email. And Yedase, we appreciate you coming out. Okay, and Medase, and Yedase means thank you. We thank you, Yedase, for all the comments, for all the questions. And we will be having another NKOMMO session. Just, check our pages, and we give constant updates on a regular basis. And again, Yedase, we appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. Oh, it looks like we have one more question. Okay, so you said, what do you mean when you say the abosom came down to us? Now, I don't know which particular section you're talking about, but one of the ways that the abosom, the forces in nature, the divinities come to us is through spirit possession. So wherever you find black people anywhere in the world, when we talk about spirit possession, it's not something just because we read about spirit possession and we're imitating something. Now, some people do fake possessions, but you can go to inner Afuraitkaitnit, central, south, north, east. You can go to North Central South America, the Caribbean. You can go to Papua New Guinea and Australia, and wherever you find black people, no matter how separate they are, if they're engaged in ritual and drums begin, songs begin, people dance, they get possessed. Sometimes it's not through dance, sometimes it is. They get possessed by a force in nature. The spirit enters the body and communicates and uses a person's body as a vessel to communicate with the community. Ancestral possession and spirit possession. We deal with that in the Ubin Sheng, the Ancestral Summons, in the book, which is softcover as well as ebook. And then we also have a two-part video series where we go through that book in detail. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the abosom coming upon us. That's the major way they come to us. They communicate in different ways, but the most intimate way, of course, is spirit possession, where they enter the body of the person. And that happens in various forms and in various ways. Sometimes just the communication at the shrine is a mild form of Akhan or possession, and then sometimes it's more intense. So that's what we mean. Okay, you said the disordered spirits left Afuraitkaitnit before the abosom descended to us. So you're talking about in the Kuku Tumtum. So you have at the beginning of creation, of course, after the world is formed, then Afuraitkaitnit people are formed. So we're in the world, right? We're living just like animals living in the world, just like plant life is existing. We're living. Then we communicate. We learn. The first ritual practice we ever engaged in was when the very first person, if you can consider, we think about the things, life, we take certain things for granted. When we talk about our ancestresses and ancestors, the very first ritual practices, if you can consider, the first time somebody in our community died. That was the first time we experienced death, because we were just created. So we're living in the world and then somebody dies. That's a new condition, because their body isn't moving. We're not used to that. But then at some point, the spirit of the person communicates with the people, and that's a new conditioning because we're not used to that. So now we're communicating with the spirit of deceased, and now we know there's a spirit realm and there's a physical realm, and we're learning to negotiate, the two. Just like we have that spiritual communication from the deceased, we also have a spiritual communication from the abosom, the forces that animate the Earth Mother, the forces that animate the mountains, rivers, sun, moon, and so forth. They'll show up. We learn to communicate with them. We see them, engage. We see spiritual energy, and we learn that there's a difference between, the spirit that animates the sun, comes to us in dreams or in other ways, or when people are, dancing and stuff like that, and so forth. That's how we were engaging, through communication with the abosom, communication with the ancestresses and ancestors. That's communication. And of course, we have the abosom in our crop. At some point, later on, the abosom began to possess ritually. And we always had a Okraa, but the abosom, like say the abosom of a certain mountain that we migrated to, or a certain river, that force in nature, before we used to just communicate, pour libation, the abosom comes forward, do divination, the abosom manipulates the divination implements or whatever, communicates with us. At some point, ritual possession occurred for the first time. And once the ritual possession occurred and affected the person, their cells, the energy moving through their body, that affects their cells, including their reproductive cells. When that kind of person's cells are altered, and then they copulate with somebody else, then they give birth to a child whose cells have that altered state, where they're a magnet for the abosom to be able to possess them. So that's what we were talking about. We didn't always have possession. We had communication always, but we didn't always have possession. So there's proverbial wisdom about, like for example, in the Akhan tradition, when the first person got possessed by an abosom, and people didn't know what was happening at first, and then they realized it was deity possession. Because they were used to communicating with the divinity, but they weren't used to spirit possession. Because it didn't happen. There was a first time that happened. The whites and their offspring had already, those who became the whites and their offspring, they had already separated when that activity began to intensify on the continent. That's just a small group. They left, just like in our communities now, if somebody molested a child or did whatever, we typically would kill them, beat them to death, shoot them, kill them, stab them, whatever. Sometimes they would escape before the family gets a chance to catch them. Same thing, the very first people who ever did anything like that, typically we would kill them, but some people escaped up into northern Eurasia, up into those northern areas before the people got a chance to capture them. They were black when they left. They were criminals, just like you have criminals in the community, people engaging in perverse disordered behavior. Their cry has already been repelled because they're engaged in that disordered behavior. So they're still black at this point, but they had already separated. They later, and their descendants later became the whites and their offspring. They were isolated up in northern Europe. Their inbreeding, increasing the inbreeding greatly increases the incidence of albinism, but also other genetic abnormalities like autoimmune diseases like, vitiligo and stuff like that. So they later lost their pigmentation. But there were spirits of disorder before they lost their pigmentation because the Okraa had been repelled. But they had already separated when that increase in activity of the abosom possessing on a consistent basis happened with the rest of us, which is 99.9% of us was still on the continent. That was a tiny group that is separated, just like there's a tiny group of cells that become cancerous, less than 1%, 1 out of every 100,000 or so, or somewhat, that becomes cancerous. That was a very small group that is separated, but the rest of us were on the continent. We refused that, infusion of energy of possession, it becoming part of our families, and that's why, because we were possessed by the abosom, that changed our blood types. It affected us, just like radiation right now. If you live in a place where there's radiation coming from power lines, that affects your cells in a negative fashion, actually. If you get possessed by an abosom, and that abosom can move your body around through ritual dance and so forth, that energy affects the cells. And when the people have children with cells, ova, or sperm cells that have been affected by that possession, then those children who are born of those affected cells will be developed and grow up to be magnets for the abosom. They're the firstborn who are connected to the abosom that possess their parents. And from that point on, they pass those altered cells down to the rest of us. So that's why we're in America, but we're still connected magnetically to the abosom that are in Afurakan, Afuraitkaitnit, that are connected to our blood circles. Wherever we go in the world, the abosom will possess us because we carry that in our blood, in our kra, in our soul and blood. Okay. Yedase. Okay, so again, Yedase, we thank you. Thank you for the questions. We appreciate it, and we will connect with you on the Odwirafo.com and Afurakan.afuraitkaitnit.ning.com. and we will be sending out the next notice of the next question and answer very soon. Yedase.